Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 12 hours, then you're probably well aware that the Nintendo presentation for the Switch happened last night, and as a direct result of that, the internet is all abuzz about it. No big surprises there. So I'd like to add my voice to the throng, if you don't mind, because I do like YouTube money, and I've got nothing better to do at the moment. So let's talk a little bit about it. There are quite a few points to touch upon: its functionality, its price tag, and of course some of the launch lineup that we've seen for the system. So let's start with that price tag, shall we? $299. That's about $50 more than the rumored price for the system, and the basic set for that price will contain the console, the dock, a set of Joy-Con controllers, which are those two little detachable controllers on either side, the grip that puts them together, an HDMI cable, and an AC adapter. There are no games packed in with the system as far as we know at this point, so you're not getting anything like Wii Sports along with it. You'll have to actually buy a title to make any use of the system whatsoever. Now, this price tag may very well be a little high for something that may end up being perceived as a DS-style handheld by a lot of people. Now, in my opinion, the price isn't really that bad when you consider what's actually in the system. If you were to treat it like, say, the Wii U, then you're paying, in the US anyway, about the same price as you were for the Wii U on launch, $299. The Japanese price is about 20% more expensive than the Wii U was in that region, so that may very well be a little bit of a stinger. And it's worth noting that the initial launch price of the 3DS was also $250, so again, $50 less than this, although what you are getting with this system is significantly more power, a much larger screen, higher resolution, detachable controllers, a dock, and all that sort of thing. So if you were to treat it strictly as a handheld device, it's a much more powerful and more feature-rich system than the 3DS was. Surprisingly enough, if we believe what Nintendo's currently saying about the Switch's battery, then this system also has a greater battery life when it comes to gaming than the 3DS did. About 3.5 hours to 5, depending on what you're doing with the 3DS, versus 3 to 6 with this system. Comparatively, that's pretty good, considering the performance of the Switch versus the performance of the 3DS and their relative technical specifications. You're also getting what is basically a home console. Now, if it's perceived as just a home console, then the current problem that they have is that this thing is more expensive than the lower, cheaper models of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. In addition to that fact, both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 bundles at that price tag, which are around $250 to $260 depending on where you go, also come with a game, which does put the value proposition in an area that's not so great. That's if it's perceived as merely a home console. This is the problem that Nintendo are going to run into in terms of consumer perception. There's going to be a very mixed reaction amongst potential buyers as to what this thing actually is, and it is unclear as to how many of them will connect fully with the message from Nintendo that this is a hybrid system, that you can play it on the move, you can use it in a tabletop configuration, and you can use it in a home console configuration, which will run games at a higher resolution as a result of the fact that you've got it plugged in, there is most likely additional cooling in the dock, and of course, you're not going to have any underclocking issues with the CPU as a result of power consumption while you're in portable mode. It's also possible that we may see some consumers perceive it as a kind of tablet device, and technically it is, to some extent. It does have a 6.2-inch touchscreen. That said, the touchscreen does run at 720p, which, comparative to most tablet devices, isn't particularly good. That wouldn't be excellent for consumption of media, and it's definitely not that great for web browsing either. Compared to smartphones and tablet devices, that is far under spec. So I certainly hope that it isn't perceived that way, because if anybody's buying it for that reason, they're going to be in for a nasty surprise. That said, if they're buying a tablet/portable-like device for gaming, the actual spec of the thing is relatively impressive. We don't know exactly what's going on with the processor. We know it's some sort of custom Tegra by NVIDIA. Now, we do know some of the specs of some of the existing Tegra processors. We know the specs of the K1, which is what the NVIDIA Shield tablet, that's a $200 device, uses. And we also know the specs and performance of the X1. Now, we know that that's about 1.8 to 2 times the performance of the K1 according to NVIDIA's benchmarks, and there is also the Tegra P1, which is speculated to be something similar to what we're seeing in the Switch, but we don't know yet. If we were to assume the worst and say that this custom processor was equivalent to the X1, you've still got a pretty powerful machine. You've got something that can outperform, say, an iPad Air. You've got something that can outperform NVIDIA's very own Shield tablet. Something like the Surface Pro 4 would run it over with a tank, but that's also a Surface Pro 4, and those things are significantly more expensive than a Nintendo Switch, and they're not designed for gaming either. In terms of actual handheld performance, I'd say this thing is pretty damn competitive, assuming that the games run well on the battery-powered mode. As far as we are aware, according to Nintendo, they're targeting 720p 60 with the majority of at least first-party titles, which is good performance, although the resolution is lower than what you would necessarily see in quite a few phone and mobile games. On the other hand, those games do tend to run fairly poorly, so that's not necessarily a great comparison. Plus, of course, they don't have a physical control method, which is a big disadvantage. In my view, for what it is, I think it's a fairly reasonably priced piece of hardware. The problem is that most people aren't going to perceive it just on a hardware level. They're going to perceive it as an overall value proposition. They're going to say to themselves, why am I buying this and also having to pay for a game? If I buy this on its own, I can't do anything other than play demos on it because there's no game packed in with it. The real sting in the tail is actually the price of the accessories. The system on its own, okay, I can see that. I can see that price being reasonable. $50 cheaper would have been better, but it's okay for what it is. The problem is, if you want to buy an additional dock for this thing, let's say you want to use the system on multiple televisions around the house without having to unplug everything and plug it back in, you're going to be paying $90 for a new dock. That is extremely expensive for what essentially amounts to a charging station with perhaps a little bit of cooling going on. We know there's no co-processing going on whatsoever with the dock, so I cannot, for the life of me, justify $90 for that. The Joy-Cons, if you want a set of them, they're going to cost you $80, and the Pro Controller, which to me is the most egregious, is a $70 package. Now, we don't know if the Pro Controller has any interesting functionality going on with it whatsoever. The Joy-Cons have things like HD Rumble, they have a sensor at the front which can detect gestures, and they have motion control gyroscopes within the actual units themselves. Plus, of course, they can be split, and they're quite innovative. So you can perhaps argue that the price for those is reasonable based on the fact that they're new technology. The Pro Controller, on the other hand, that is more expensive than every other first-party regular controller. You can get a Xbox One or a PlayStation 4 controller cheaper than that. It's certainly nowhere near as good as the Xbox One Elite controller, which is significantly more expensive, so one has to wonder how they can possibly justify that price. And I don't think most people are going to be able to justify that price either. Hopefully, we'll see quite a lot of competition on the third-party controller front for this thing, but who knows exactly how much that's going to be supported by Nintendo, if at all. Third-party Joy-Cons are almost certainly not going to happen, I would imagine, and the Pro Controller, well, who knows at this point. So that's the real issue that I've got with the price. It's not the price of the console itself, although it is arguably a little high for some people. It's the price of the additional controllers and accessories that's really going to push this thing up. Now, moving on to the specs and overall performance. We still don't know exactly what the processor is. We know it's a custom Tegra. We don't know what the specs of that are, so we can't really estimate overall performance and capabilities compared to the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. We also don't know how much RAM the thing has. What we do know is that it only has 32 gigs of internal storage. That is a very low amount, considering the digital marketplace of 2017. You're not going to be able to download an awful lot onto that. Now, it does have expandable micro SD capacity, up to 256 gig. There's a pretty significant problem with that. Micro SD cards are not very fast. They don't have good transfer speeds. Let's give you an example. The typical micro SD card is slower than a 5,400 RPM mechanical hard drive. We're not even talking SSDs here, we're talking about the slowest mechanical hard drive. The kind of thing that you would find inside a PlayStation 4, which has already been criticized as basically obsolete. Now, this is with a fast, expensive micro SD card. For instance, if you were to get a high-end micro SD, that is anywhere between $150 to $200. I'm talking the high-performance, highest-end ones you can get here. Something like the Samsung Evo Select. That claims it has a 95 megabytes per second transfer speed. That is about half the transfer speed of a good 7,200 RPM mechanical drive, and several times less than even a basic SSD. I'm not even going to bring the PCIe SSDs into the mix here, that's just unfair. The reality is, of course, that the majority of people are not going to be buying the top-end micro SD cards. They're going to be buying the cheaper ones, which again are even slower than that. You're looking at closer to 40 or 50 megabytes a second. There have had to be recent updates to these things because the new GoPros, for instance, were putting out more data than an SD card could actually handle. That's a problem. Bearing in mind that this is where you're going to be storing digitally downloaded games that go beyond that 32 internal gigabyte limit. Now, if you look at the size of modern digital games, there are games that are larger than the entire internal storage capacity of this thing. Nintendo first-party games have a tendency to be smaller in terms of storage, and we also know that this thing is using a form of micro SD for its game cards. But the reality of it is that if you were to take part in the digital marketplace, if you were to buy games online, you are going to have not only storage problems, but also speed problems in terms of load times. Another problem which isn't really being addressed is the fact that micro SD cards tend to have reliability issues when used extensively over long periods of time. As in a situation where you are constantly reading data for a game that you're playing. This means it is likely that your micro SD card is going to either stop working entirely or going to corrupt some of the data in a relatively short period of time. Don't expect this thing to last you 5 or so years. You're most likely going to have to replace it during the lifespan of the console, possibly multiple times. That is a problem. Unreliable storage means lost data. It means re-downloading games. It means potentially lost save files unless this online service that Nintendo is providing has modern cloud save functionality, and we don't know if it does yet. Those are some of the concerns I've got in terms of its specs. However, from a positive point of view when it comes to performance, it seems that they're targeting 60 frames per second for all of their first-party titles. This includes Zelda. The thing is that we haven't actually seen proof of that yet. The trailer that they put out was at 30 frames per second, it was not at 60. The earlier footage that we saw of Zelda was dropping even below 30. Of course, the game isn't out yet, but it is coming out in 2 months, so they don't have that much time to optimize. And there are also reports from the media at the event that got to play the demo that the performance on the Switch, and I'm talking about plugged in here, not handheld, was by no means 60 frames per second. It was closer to 30, it was unstable. That's a bit of a problem. If we look at the trailers for things like Mario Odyssey, and games like ARMS and Splatoon, those are clearly running at 60 frames per second. We don't know how stable exactly, but the trailers showed them running at 60, so that's good. The question is whether or not they'll be able to get something that looks as good as Zelda running at a consistent 60, and why exactly, if they were able to do that, that the build that was demonstrated at the event for the press was not running close to that. Bear in mind that this information regarding Zelda comes from a Eurogamer video. I do not believe there is any official Nintendo confirmation of that anywhere. So we're relying on the word of Eurogamer there, and the footage that they showed was absolutely not running at 60. In fact, it looked unstable at 30, so I am somewhat concerned about that, to say the least. The thing is that Zelda is most likely going to be the killer app for launch, and frankly, if I were to be interested in it, I would want it to be running at 60. I'm not going to play an action game at 30 frames per second. That's just not going to happen. Why would I? There's tons of games I could play on PC and even other consoles that run much better than that, and as a result are more enjoyable. So if they're looking to attract people like me who are more knowledgeable, more core gamers, then you want your game to be running better than that. Honestly, if it does end up running at 30, then it would be disappointing for me because that seems to go against Nintendo's main ideology when it comes to design. They do look towards 60 frames per second and they're willing to sacrifice graphical fidelity to get there, and I love that fact. That is fantastic because there are no other console manufacturers that are currently willing to do that. As a result, these big showpiece first-party titles on Xbox One and PlayStation 4 run like absolute arse. My hope is that this report regarding Zelda is accurate and that the final version will run at 60. At least Mario certainly will, and Splatoon will as well, and all of the other first-party titles that we were shown in the presentation did appear to be running at 60 in the trailers at any rate. Again, we don't know how stable that's going to be. That's the reality of the situation. I am not overly concerned about the technical specifications of this machine and its overall power compared to Xbox One and PlayStation 4, because the reality of it is, even if it does underperform versus those machines, if those games run at 60 on Switch, not 30, then, as far as I'm concerned, it's a better machine than the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. There's no point in having that extra power if you're not using it in the right places. Microsoft and Sony's design philosophy when it comes to their first-party big system seller games is this: make the trailers look as shiny as possible, performance be damned. This is even true on the PlayStation 4 Pro, which is incredibly disappointing. The majority of games that were upgraded for that system do not feature 60 FPS functionality. They just feature a checkerboard 4K, and they can't even maintain 30 at that. If Switch's first-party, and even better if its third-party titles target 60 instead of 30, then to me, that's a much better machine to complement my PC versus the other consoles, which are just vastly inferior versions of my PC. Another interesting feature that leads into discussions about usage scenarios and functionality is that it has a LAN capability, in the sense that you can connect up to 8 of these switches together for a local Wi-Fi multiplayer mode. This is something that makes a hell of a lot more sense with the Switch, considering its portability versus other consoles. That's not to say that LAN capability for consoles isn't a good feature. It's something that is lacking in the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, forcing you to use their online functionality instead, and getting rid of all of the advantages that you have with a local area connection, which is namely the fact that it's much, much faster. This function makes a hell of a lot of sense if you assume that people are just going to be walking around with their Switches and their messenger bags or backpacks or whatever and have them available to play. Not only do you have this local couch co-op and competitive aspect of it, where you can split off the Joy-Cons and use them for a split screen or single screen tabletop mode, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a great little feature, although I have to wonder how often it's going to get used for most people. But you also have the capability to create a much larger game with multiple switches. For instance, you could set up a LAN party and play Splatoon as opposed to having to play it over their online service. And there are, of course, a number of reasons to do that when we get onto the thing that has riled people up the most, and that is the fact that the Switch is moving over to a pay-per-month online matchmaking service. Up until this point, Nintendo has been unique in the sense that they did not charge for online play. Microsoft was the first to do it, Sony followed suit with the PlayStation 4, and now, unfortunately, Nintendo is going down the same route. The service will be free up until the end of summer 2018, according to the company, at which point they will move over to a $5 pay-per-month online system. In terms of the advantages that this would give you as a consumer, guess what? There aren't any. They're offering a free virtual console game, so a ROM of an ancient-arse game, and unfortunately, you won't be able to keep it past the month that you got it in. You'll have to pay for it. It's basically a rental, as opposed to a permanent ownership while your subscription is active. This is far, far worse than anything that Microsoft and Sony offer. Not only is it a virtual console game, which in my opinion has basically no value. It's a ROM, and a lot of people have no problems downloading and emulating ROMs, and frankly, I don't blame them, considering how old those games are. But you don't even get to keep the thing past that first month, which is nonsense. Complete and total nonsense. That is a terrible deal. Now, while this might be the focus, I have to say the larger problem is that up to this point, Nintendo has not proven that they are capable of creating a competent and well-fleshed-out online system. Their online system is flat-out worse than everything else on the market. It's worse than Game Center on iOS, for God's sake. It's worse than PlayStation Network. It's worse than Xbox Live. It gets the absolute crap kicked out of it by Steam. Nintendo's online services, whether it be matchmaking or online digital purchases, could be described as archaic in comparison to the competition. This is at least excusable when you're dealing with a free service. It is not excusable when you're being asked to pay for it. Nintendo is years behind the competition when it comes to their online services. They're extremely restrictive, both in terms of functionality and presentation. You could consider them childish. It takes longer to do anything with the system versus any other online service. It takes longer to buy a game. It takes longer to get into a game to play it. It takes longer to add somebody to a party or friends list, assuming that you even can. It lacks a proper unified account system. If you want to transfer things from the Wii to the Wii U, you have to go through an overly complex process, and you even have to pay in some situations to upgrade Virtual Console games to Wii U versions. You can dodge this by just using the original Wii versions, but in order to do that, of course, you've got to load the Wii environment within the Wii U, which is an additional step, takes a ton of time, and frankly, by that point, you probably don't want to play whatever 20 or 30-year-old game you happen to have lying around on your SD card. If Nintendo wants to justify a paid online service, they're going to have to offer a hell of a lot more than what they've shown so far, and they're going to have to demonstrate that they are capable of making a fast, efficient, and feature-rich online system that is comparable and competitive to what is currently on the market. In my personal opinion, paying for an online matchmaking service is ridiculous. PC doesn't require you to do that, and it's proven that it's more than capable of providing a superior service for free. The question is whether or not, despite that fact, Nintendo will be able to come up with something that actually works properly. Based on their past performance, that is something that's highly doubtful. Now, if we look at other parts of the functionality, I'm actually kind of on board with the idea. Some people are not, but when it comes to portable devices, I am disturbed by the trend towards touch-based controls. The reason being that touch-based controls for the majority of core game genres are terrible. This is something that I have despised with the mobile phone and tablet market, and I'm glad that something is coming along with real physical controls as well as the performance and hopefully third and first party support to back it up. I have to wonder if the use of the Tegra architecture is going to allow for easier porting of titles. If so, we could see a fairly large groundswell of indie games on the system. And for a system like this, I actually think indie support is very important. You might think that's a bit of a weird thing to say, indie games don't sell systems. You're right. However, if you look at the usage scenario of this thing, if you think about taking it to a friend's house and playing games with them, the kind of games that you would play with the tabletop mode are probably going to be couch co-op or couch competitive. Most of those games are made by indie developers. We're talking about things like Towerfall, Samurai Gun, Overcooked, Speedrunners, Crawl, Lovers in a Dangerous Space Time, Rocket Fist, that sort of thing. These are the kind of games that would work perfectly on this system, and it gets past the problem that a lot of those games have, which is that usually they're stuck on a system which you can't easily move. It's particularly true on the PC. Games like that launch without online functionality tend to suffer greatly in terms of sales, because let's be honest, you don't generally get a large group of people around your PC. Most people don't. You can, and of course you can plug one into a television, no problem, but they're usually installed in an office with a monitor. If you take this system, you can actually put it wherever the hell you want. You can set it up with this tabletop mode with the flip stand. You can split the Joy-Con controllers up, and you can get playing pretty much immediately. That's a great piece of functionality to me, and I actually do find that useful, not only in terms of a home family environment, but in terms of going to conventions, for instance. This is the kind of scenario I would use the Switch in. I would put it in my laptop bag, I would put it in my hand luggage, I would take it on a plane, and then I'd use it when I was at a convention like PAX or MomoCon or CoxCon, what the hell is CoxCon? Something like that. And a lot of people are going to conventions these days. There is a thriving convention culture, not only in the United States, but also in European countries as well. And what we can see in that scenario is an awful lot of people either gaming on mobile phones or gaming on 3DS. There's a ton of that at PAX. The number of people that bring 3DS, even just to Street Pass, is massive. The potential for Switch play at an event like that, I think, is very, very likely. I think that's actually the kind of scenario where it would work really well. And I'd probably own a system like that just for that reason. And of course, taking it over to a friend's house or visiting a family member, that's also a great usage scenario for it as well. When I go home to the UK, I tend to break out the Jackbox Party Pack. I'll just throw it on my laptop and then away you go. If you could get support for games like that on a Switch, which is a far more affordable and portable device, and then go one step further as a result of the Joy-Con being able to play direct control games as opposed to just party games like Jackbox, I think you've got a really nice system there. The fairly high cost of additional sets of Joy-Cons is probably going to kick more than two-player gaming in the teeth somewhat, but I have to say that I do see the appeal of this portability. What I'll also say is that while I'm not really so keen on motion and gesture-based controls, I do like the fact that it includes HD Rumble. We haven't seen a huge priority in the development of Rumble over the last, say, decade when it comes to home consoles. I've actually seen a hell of a lot more advancement in terms of haptic feedback with mobile devices, and we've seen far more usefulness with haptic feedback than you would find in Rumble, which, while a lot of people really appreciate Rumble, is basically just an immersion enhancer for the most part. If you increase the detail of the Rumble feature, you can take it far beyond merely being an enhancement to the immersion. We've seen some examples of that in earlier technology. If you go and look at Silent Hill Shattered Memories on the Wii, if you look at the functionality of the motion controller there, plus the Rumble, which actually allowed you to do things like shake a container and feel if there was something rattling inside, there are real gameplay applications to detailed Rumble functionality. The more detailed you make that feature, the more accurate you make it, and the more things you can simulate with it, the more gameplay applications there are. So I do like that idea, and I like that that is part of the feature set. Again, not so keen on motion controls, but what I will say is that I've always been a believer in the application of pointer-based motion controls for first-person shooters. If you go back to the Wii and you play something like Red Steel 2, don't play the original, it's awful. Red Steel 2, far, far better. Alternatively, if you fire up your PlayStation 3, you get a set of Move controllers and you play something like Resistance or Killzone with them, what you'll find is that they're significantly easier to use for first-person shooters than a regular controller. They're actually far closer to the accuracy of a mouse than a controller is, and of course it also gives you that nice little bonus of light gun functionality, and I'm a bit of a sucker for light gun games. So far, if we look at the implementation, the chances are you're not going to find something that fits into that category. You're looking at the more kinetic form of implementation. So you swing your controller and that punches. We saw that in the new IP that was announced. It went by the name of ARMS, which I actually like the look of. I think it's a fun-looking little competitive game, although I do question just how competitive a motion-controlled game can really be, considering that you're quite reliant on the accuracy of the controller, plus there is the aspect of potentially getting tired. That's not what you want over a long gaming session, and that may very well limit its competitive appeal. That said, it does look like it's quite a lot of fun, and of course, if the motion functionality on these new controllers is good, then it'll probably be quite enjoyable to play. I'm also quite interested to see how it could be implemented in a game like Skyrim, which is a third-party title which is being ported over. It is an old game, there's no doubt about that, but it is offering a portable version of this with physical controls. I know you can play it on a laptop, and I also know you can play it on a Surface. That said, neither of those really offers that handheld, physical controlled functionality that the Switch does, so I can see it shifting a few units. Plus, of course, you could implement that motion control mode, and I think there's quite a lot of appeal to using the two Joy-Cons as your sword and shield in a very kinetic way. I don't really like Skyrim all that much, but I can certainly see why that would appeal to people. There could very well be a market for creating motion-controlled versions of older games on the Switch, because you then also have that additional bit of value proposition in saying that this is a portable version of a AAA game. Think about fully functional and featured versions of, say, Far Cry 4 or Call of Duty on a system like this. That's possible. Plus, you can then plug the thing in, go full motion with it, and gain the advantages of pointer-based motion controls in first-person shooters. So there are a couple of nice little features that could give a justification for porting those older games over, if they're done properly. Now, in terms of its lineup when it comes to launch, I have a fairly large concern about how many games are going to be available in the launch window. As it stands, we only know of 8 that will launch in March, and not all of those are going to be available on initial launch. In fact, we only know of a couple that will be. When it comes to first-party games, Zelda is going to be the system seller, as it was with the original Wii. Trust me, I know, I was working at Game at the time. That's the game that shifted copies, nothing else did on the launch of the Wii. Now, at the presentation, they showcased a new 3D Mario title, Super Mario Odyssey, which is, strangely enough, it seems at least partly based in the real world, which gave me a very Sonic Adventure vibe, and that's not necessarily a good thing. However, despite all of that, the game's launch window is actually Christmas 2017. That's going to be a bit of an issue. If they had that and Zelda available on launch, that would be a pretty strong showing. Unfortunately, launch day right now only has Zelda, a Skylanders game, Just Dance, and 1-2 Switch, which is their kind of Wii Sportsy sort of title for the system, or you could describe it as Nintendo Land. Based on what I saw of it, it certainly looks far more like a pack-in game. It looks like a selection of mini-games that use the controller. It does not look like something that could justify a $50 price tag, yet it has a $50 price tag. This absolutely seems like the sort of thing that should have been packed in with every Switch, and it's not. That's going to be a bit of a problem. Wii Sports could be viewed as the killer app for the Nintendo Wii, but I doubt it would have been anywhere near as popular had it not been packed in with the majority of systems on launch. I am concerned about that. Within the launch window, we do have some third-party support. We've got the new Sonic game coming out. We have I Am Setsuna, which is a traditional JRPG. We have Has Been Heroes. Of course, we have ARMS coming in spring. There's a new Bomberman game. We even have a new version of Street Fighter 2 announced for the system, and there's a port of Mario Kart 8. Now, there are other first and third-party games that are very interesting to me. Splatoon 2 is, of course, a big deal. SMT, there is a new title from the Shin Megami Tensei series, and we also have a Fire Emblem Warriors game on the way, and Xenoblade 2. These are all core titles that should be very interesting and should hopefully shift a good number of copies, but we don't know when any of them are coming out at this point. I can't imagine that the Switch is going to launch with only 4 games. That would be ridiculous. That would be one of the lowest, if not the lowest in history. I don't see that happening. There's got to be far, far more of that. Compared to the Wii U and its launch window, this is awful. And the stark reality of it is that one of the main reasons the Wii U fell flat on its face was a lack of third-party support. There doesn't seem to be strong third-party support out of the gate for the Nintendo Switch either. In fact, it looks even weaker than the Wii U. That's in itself a huge problem, and it's most likely going to cause a lot of people to hold off on purchase, because they don't want a dead system within the first few months of launch. Why would you? We definitely need to see more in both the first and third-party realms, and we need to get specific release dates so we know what we're going to be looking at here and what is going to be available to buy over the course of 2017. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of pretty damn justified consumer anxiety regarding this system. Alright, that pretty much covers everything that was in the conference that I wanted to discuss. My conclusion would be this. I'm on board with the overall concept, and I'm on board with first-party titles targeting 60 frames per second. That is what I'm looking for in a console, and I'm not getting it from the PlayStation or the Xbox right now. So that puts the Switch ahead of both of those systems in my mind. The problem is, of course, I don't know how many first-party titles are coming for the system and how many I would want to play in the first place, nor do I know what kind of third-party titles that will be exclusive to that system that I would either want to play portably or would otherwise not be available on the PC or other consoles. I'm quite concerned about the online system. It sounds like it's going to be pretty damn awful. We're going to have to see far more details come out that are much more encouraging if you want to get people to pay for it. Although the system does have significant offline functionality that is lacking in the other two consoles, so I am positive about that aspect of it. The controls look pretty cool, although, again, a little bit gimmicky. It's unfortunate that Nintendo continues to feel the need to go down that route. I don't think they need to. I think their first-party software is more than enough to sell a more traditional console. They evidently do not believe that, and the portable nature of it probably has quite a lot to do with the nature of the Japanese marketplace, which has very much shifted towards portable gaming far, far more so than traditionally over the last few years. And we are seeing flagging console sales in that market as a direct result of that. So Nintendo is looking to capitalize on the success of the 3DS in the Japanese marketplace and also take a bite out of the mobile market, which is massive over in Asian territories. The price tag for the system is going to cause some problems for some people. The price tag for the accessories is going to cause problems for everybody. I don't think there's a single person that's turned around and said, yeah, $90 for a dock sounds totally reasonable. It's not. It absolutely is not. I certainly hope to see price cuts in that regard prior to release. It's a nice looking little system. It's a good innovative piece of technology. It has some interesting usage scenarios that are not going to be applicable to everybody, but when they are used to full effect are going to give it advantages over other systems. However, I do have doubts when it comes to the software lineup. There's some good stuff in there, but I don't know if there's anywhere near enough good stuff. And of course, I think we're going to need to see significant indie support in order to make sure that the lineup is padded out with more games. Otherwise, it's going to be another Wii U all over again, and that's the last thing that Nintendo wants. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If you did not, the dislike button is right over there, so feel free to switch. Click. I'll see you next time.